Well, first of all, I think, again, this 20-point ceasefire plan, the overwhelming majority of those 20 points were presented by Israel. This was the deal that Israel wanted. I'm not saying that the United States did not edit some of the points or that there was some feedback from other countries, but this was the deal.
I thought it was something that was forced upon Israel.
Mainstream media gives you the impression that there is nothing good about America. In direct contrast to that, my podcasts will prove by examples that America has always been and still is the land of opportunity for everyone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. Today, we're going to be diving into one of the most important and sensitive conversations of this series, the rise of anti-Semitism across the world and the many ongoing challenges that Israel is facing. My guest today is Alex Traiman, a man whose insight, integrity, and journalistic courage have made him one of the clearest voices reporting on the ground in Jerusalem. Alex is the CEO and Jerusalem bureau chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, JNS. In addition to being an experienced journalist, he's also a filmmaker, a writer, and a consultant to various startups. He is a lifelong advocate for clear, fact-based reporting on Israel and Jewish affairs. Because of his detailed coverage of 8 election cycles in Israel and of numerous Israeli-Arab conflicts over the years, he's often featured on major networks including the BBC, Bloomberg, CBS, and Fox. Alex, welcome to Life Lessons with Dr. Bob.
Dr. Bob, it's so great to be here.
Let's start our conversation with anti-Semitism. But first, I want to point out that the term anti-Semitism is both incorrect and inadequate to describe the intense, visceral hatred of Jews that it is meant to describe. Here's my reasoning. First, anti simply means against. Like antiperspirant, it's against perspiration. Next, according to Google, the term Semite means a member of any of the peoples who speak or spoke a Semitic language, including, in particular, Jews and Arabs. So anti-Semitism means that you're against Jews and Arabs. So I prefer to use the more accurate terms Jew hatred and Jew hater. But for this conversation, it's okay to stick with the more familiar term, anti-Semitism. Moving on. Alex, right after Hamas's barbaric attack on Israel civilians on October 7th, 2023, we've seen anti-Semitism around the world, even in the U.S., spike to levels we haven't witnessed in decades, from college campuses to city streets, within major institutions, and sometimes even in the halls of Congress. As someone observing this from both Israel and America, what do you think is driving this alarming surge in Jew hatred?
Well, thanks, Dr. Bob. I actually think that this is part of a strategy that our enemies have, which is to sow anti-Semitism. But it's not just anti-Semitism or Jew hatred or anti-Jewish racism. It is also anti-Westernism, anti-Americanism. And they use anti-Semitism as part of that strategy. But we've seen this on the university campuses. You and I, we've discussed this many times in the past. As much as 25 years ago, we were already seeing the beginnings of the Israel Apartheid Week on the university campuses with organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine and others. And so when you start to see this in the halls of Congress today, well, these are the organizers of those types of anti-Jewish protests on college campuses back then.
And anti-Semitism today often hides behind phrases like, we're just anti-Israel or we're anti-Zionist. From your perspective as a journalist, how can the media responsibly distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israeli policy and rhetoric that crosses the line into Jew hatred?
Well, you're actually raising an important point. People didn't like Jews, but it became unfashionable to be an anti-Semite, right? You can't just not like Jews if you like people from other religions. So people pivoted their strategy and said, well, we're not against Jews, right? I went to school, junior high school with a Jew.
Some of my friends.
Yeah, some of my friends are Jewish.
Yeah.
It's just I don't really like Israel. And then I think Israel did a pretty good job of responding to that and saying, well, hey, if you don't like Israel, but you like any other country in the world, or you don't hold other countries to the same standards as you hold Israel, well, that's also anti-Semitism. And actually today it's gone one step further, because people understand you can't only single out Israel if you're not singling out China or any other country that's supposedly violating human rights. So today people say, well, I don't not like Jews. I had some Jewish friends, I don't not like Israel. I understand Israel has some great technology, and I'm probably using that in my phone or in my car or whatever it is. I just don't like Netanyahu and his government, right? And they can't tell you anything that Netanyahu and his government are doing, and they don't
that
know.
they disagree with.
Right.
Yeah.
But so when you hear people say that, when they say, I just don't like Netanyahu and their government, know that means that they're anti-Israel, and know that probably also means that they're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, it certainly means that. With half the world's Jewish population, if you don't like Israel, you don't like Jews.
And I think that the key here, just going back to your original question, is the double standard, right? So if you are up in arms about what Israel's doing in the Gaza Strip, after Hamas committed the most heinous, brutal, barbaric attack, in the history of the modern state of Israel, and Israel responded, I think more moderately than any other country that got attacked like that would respond.
Right.
And then people are saying that Israel committed a genocide. I mean, Israel has literally shot more precision-guided missiles in Gaza than people that they've killed, right? Now, each one of these missiles could kill as many people as they wanted it to, right? So when you see the precision pinpoint strikes and the fact that there's 10 times more Palestinians living in Gaza than any of these Palestinian-controlled territories than there was in 1948.
Right.
But people say that this is a genocide, but they won't say that any other situation where people are getting slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands, much more than in this conflict, they won't say that that's a genocide. They don't even know what it is.
And
so
if it's a genocide, we're pretty bad at it, because the Palestinian population has increased quite dramatically over the years. So what kind of genocide is that?
I mean, on the basis of birth rates, I think that probably today in 2025, as we enter into 2026, there may be as many Palestinians alive in all of the territories as there was before October 7th, 2023. So heck of a
We're
genocide.
pretty lousy at genocide.
And not only are we lousy at genocide, we're also lousy at famine. Right.
Right. All the pictures of famine, they show usually a woman or a mother holding up a baby. The woman ain't underweight.
The New York Times put a photo on the front page demonstrating the famine, and the editors of the New York Times knew full well that the child that they were putting on the front of the paper had like a cerebral palsy or a muscular dystrophy or some type of a genetic disease.
It had nothing to do with lack of food.
Exactly. And you see the brothers of the child in question, they look fine. Israel has been feeding the Gazans as a policy, not starving.
Yeah, what
the
country
Gazans as a policy.
feeds their enemies? What country? And provides electricity and water to their enemies? How do you explain the fact that most old-line Jewish organizations, in particular ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that were founded with the mission of fighting anti-Semitism, are now more concerned with fighting Islamophobia?
I think it's because you see like Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL. This is a former Obama staffer, okay? And you see that the ADL is just an arm of the progressive
Left.
wing. And so what I'm actually afraid that it's even worse than you say. It's not that they're just promoting Islamophobia, that they're actually being used by the progressive left to promote policies of censorship. Okay, that the progressives are trying to take away First Amendment rights to free speech, and they're actually using Jews because they're saying, we don't want to see anti-Semitism. We don't want to see anti-Semitic content. So Jews, will you be on board with the censorship of anti-Semitic content? Now, most Jews would say, well, yes, we would be on board with the censorship of anti-Semitic content. The problem with that is it's a slippery slope. And the second you start censoring one type of content, all of a sudden you extend the rules and start censoring other types of content. And so I really think that you see organizations like the ADL and a lot of Jewish organizations which have leadership that are very progressive in their nature, that they're not really being used to defeat and root out the cause of the hatred. They're actually trying to forward this agenda of promoting the idea that there is hatred all over society and that we need to do censorship.
Mm-hmm. So given that, how can concerned Jews and our few allies, how can we organize and push back on those radical individuals and organizations that openly support Hamas and call for the destruction of Israel?
Well, haters are going to hate, as they say. And I think that what we need to do is stop being so alarmed that people are hating Jews. And people have been hating Jews
3,000 years
since we've been Jews, right? And I think that the thing that's different, and I actually think that the thing that's fueling a lot of the modern hatred of Israel and of the Jewish people is that we are strong, is that we are winning, but that we have to actually adapt our own psyche to recognize that we are strong and we are winning and the momentum is with us and people are turning towards us, and that Israel is actually emerging from a developing nation into a power, like a superpower, an economic power, a technological power, a military power, and quite frankly also a moral superpower. And we have to step into that role. Right. And I think that as we do that and as we're proud of ourselves and what we've accomplished, and especially during this war in these last 2 years, you see the resiliency, the strength of the Jewish people, what we've accomplished to defeat an entire axis that was developed over decades to wipe out the state of Israel, and now they're on their heels. I mean, it's unbelievable. So we just have to be very confident and cool and collected. And I think that people are going to turn to respect the state of Israel. And we're actually already seeing that in the Middle East.
We don't have to be loved. We just want to be respected.
Exactly.
Or feared. I don't even mind if we're feared. Let's shift to what's happening in Israel. During the Gaza war, one thing that stood out to many observers was how often protests and public statements from Israelis left focused almost exclusively on bring the hostages home. Look, of course, everyone wants the hostages returned safely. That's universal. But it seemed that some of those groups were more focused on the hostages than on winning the war against Hamas. Can you help us understand that dynamic? Why was that emphasis so strong on the left? And what does it reveal about Israel's internal divisions, even in wartime?
Well, you see that there was a big movement in Israel, as you mentioned, to quote unquote bring them home, bring the hostages
under
home.
any conditions, do whatever it takes.
And if you would have driven through Israel, walked through Israel, you would see the entire country was placarded with yellow and posters, bring them home, bring them home. And you could see, obviously, that there was a lot of money put into this movement of bring them home. Now, where did this money come from? Who are the organizers of this movement? Well, actually, this is the anti-Netanyahu movement. We had a series of 5 consecutive elections before this government was formed over a period of the last really 5-6 years. And so during COVID, for example, in Israel, we were on lockdown. It was a bad time. It was a bad time. And you could really go to the supermarket to buy food. You could go to the doctor's office if you needed, or you could go to an anti-Netanyahu protest.
And these were things were approved.
Right. These were and you had these crime minister protests, as they were called, and lots of signage and this protest taking place. And then sure enough, Netanyahu formed the government again. And I think it was a big repudiation of that movement.
With a big majority, right?
Absolutely. The country is moving to the right and they support Netanyahu. And when Netanyahu formed his government, they wanted to advance judicial reforms to rein in a progressive and activist Supreme Court that makes it very difficult for the government to operate. And so when the government proposed judicial reforms, this same anti-Netanyahu movement all of a sudden formed what they called the Kaplan movement, and it was Kaplan Force. It was anti-judicial reform movement, and they had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. I mean, well, not a majority of the country, but a very, very loud, vocal minority that was shutting down streets. Was really threatening to tear the country apart, and they were warning that that members of the reserves, pilots in the Air Force wouldn't show up to fight.
They urged them to not show up.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was before anybody knew that there was going to be a war on October 7th, just a few months later. But sure enough, the enemies of the Jewish people were watching, and they said, Israel is very vulnerable right now. They're saying, the pilots are saying they're not going to show up to fight. So maybe and the country's divided, so maybe this is a good time to attack. And I think after October 7th, much of the country recognized that this movement was tearing the country to shreds for no reason, and they'd lost a lot of credibility with the public. So immediately, with October 7th, the organizers jumped in to take the cause of the hostages from day one. And you saw all of the anti-Netanyahu political consultants and advertising agencies that were printing all of the anti-Netanyahu signage. Suddenly, they said, well, we're helping the hostages and the families of the hostages. And the reason why they did it was two. The first is to restore some credibility, because they did recognize that obviously everybody in Israel wants all the hostages home. The second thing they did was that they created a slogan for the movement, which was not "let them go, release the hostages, let my people go," which would have put the burden of getting the hostages back onto the force that took them, which was Hamas. They didn't say Hamas release the hostages. They said bring them home. And why did they do that? Because they actually hedged that Netanyahu would not succeed to rescue the hostages. I mean, we had some hostages that were inside Gaza since 2014. We had Gilad Shalit, who was a hostage in Gaza for, I believe, about 10 years. And so this movement, what they wanted was a situation in which they could continuously, for years, say that Netanyahu failed to
bring the hostages
them home.
Like it's his responsibility.
Exactly, as if he was holding them in his basement, right? So this was this dual strategy of trying to restore credibility and trying to hedge that Netanyahu would fail, because ultimately they're an anti-Netanyahu movement. And what Netanyahu did, he said, you know what? They're right. We do need to bring the hostages home, and I'm going to prove them wrong. We can do the two things that they're saying are mutually exclusive. We can defeat Hamas and win the war, and we can also bring the hostages home. And he set out to do both those things, as I think a true leader should have done in that situation.
My opinion is it's a mistake. The goal is to eradicate the enemy and, if possible, save the hostages, but that is a secondary to winning the war. And the perfect example of why it's wrong to focus on the hostages is the Gilad Shalit example that you bring up. I think Israel gave up 1,000 Hamas prisoners, many of whom were murderers, convicted of murder, gave them up for one soldier. And one of those people who was given up was Yahya Sinwar, who led the October 7th massacre of Israel. So my view is you don't negotiate ever with evil. You kill evil, and it's their responsibility. The hostages get killed, whether it's from Israeli bombs or our bombs, it doesn't matter. The goal is to kill evil once and for all. And that brings us into the ceasefire that was recently enacted, nothing signed, but under Trump's pressure. The ceasefire was recently declared, and the living hostages have been returned. That's wonderful. But from the vantage point in Jerusalem, in your years of experience covering the Middle East, what's the mood on the ground right now? Is the average Israeli, if there is such a thing as an average Israeli, are they hopeful or skeptical that the truce will endure?
Well, certainly, and the paradigm has shifted a little bit, but not all the way, right? Israel should not be negotiating with terrorists, but the deal that was signed, there were some bitter pills. I mean, Israel did release 250 murderers, convicted murderers from Israeli prisons in exchange for 20 living hostages. They also released 1,700 prisoners that they rounded up during the war. They rounded those prisoners up explicitly for the purpose of trading them with living hostages at the end of the war. I mean, they understood from day one in the war there was 255 hostages living and dead inside Gaza, and they would probably need some collateral, so they were rounding people up specifically for the purpose of a trade at the end. But I think also that a lot of Israelis wanted the active combat in this war to end. It's been 2 years. Reservists have been away for their families. Israel has a civilian army. It's a citizens' army. And, the people that are serving, and I know many people that are on their 5th, 6th, 7th service over 2 years, leaving their wives, their children, small children, their businesses for months on end. And the way Hamas set up the Gaza Strip as an entire zone, completely booby-trapped civilian zone where, the entry of tunnels go into the children's rooms in residential buildings, and where every mosque, school, hospital is used as a weapons storage center or a command center, to the extent that hostages we know were kept in the basement of hospitals, that Hamas was using their hospitals as their military bases. And they booby-trapped the entirety of the Strip. And when Israel's fighting, Hamas, they're not wearing uniforms, right? They look like civilians. There's civilians popping out of every place. And I think the understanding is that if Israel was going to continue fighting to the last man in Gaza, that it could have taken another year, another 2 years to do that. And I think that the leadership was recognizing that there could be diminishing returns, and in terms of the overall ability of Israel to withstand, this continued conflict, but also the diplomatic pressure that was on Israel. We started to see countries in Europe suggest that they were going to put arms embargoes on Israel, that there would be boycotts on Israeli products. And I think President Trump, when he spoke in the Knesset after this deal was presented, he said, look, you can't fight the entire world, and there is a double standard, and everybody is concerned with what Israel does. And so I think that the leadership of Israel recognized that they had filed down Hamas's capacity by about 90%. And you have to look at also the entire war, where they filed down Hezbollah's capabilities by 85%, that Syria has been completely demilitarized. Bashar Assad no longer the president there.
Go into that.
And that you don't have an Iran with nuclear weapons. So in totality, I mean, the military victory has been immense. And I think that most Israelis are looking at the current situation. There's a certain vulnerability maybe at this moment as we wait and see, what forces of power take hold in Gaza. But I think that most Israelis are fairly comfortable that the active phase of combat in this war is over.
Yes, having a long war is a problem for any country. But doesn't it come back to the fact that there was a mistake on October 8th or 9th or 10th? Any other country would have acted with overwhelming force and destroyed all of Gaza. Yes, the hostages would have been killed, but it would have been over. And the world would have condemned Israel, genocide. So what? That would be over in a month too.
Well, have you seen?
That's what should have been done, in my view. Now,
have you seen the pictures of Gaza?
Well, it's half destroyed, but we didn't kill enough people. And from my understanding, all of the surveys that have been done over the past 2 years, the population of Gaza, the Palestinians, support Hamas and would do it again. And the videos that I saw of the hostages being taken into Gaza and rejoicing by the population of Gaza in the brutality against those people who were captured indicates to me that they're all enemies. Now, it's not 100%, but by and large, these were enemies. And in World War II, we didn't care about, there were no innocent civilians in Nagasaki or Hiroshima, or at least we didn't consider them to be innocent. We killed them all, and it ended the war. And my feeling is that that's what we should have done. Now, there are probably reasons that we couldn't do it. Biden was president at the time.
Exactly.
We perhaps didn't have the weaponry to do it, but that is what should have been done, if at all possible. Decimate all of Gaza, and the hostages would obviously have been killed, but then Hamas would have been eradicated. Now it's like roaches. They're just going to breed again. In Iran, for example, yes, we, with America's help, we did a great job. But now I read that the Chinese are resupplying Iran. So that was a problem, I think, that Trump called a ceasefire after 10 days of war, whereas Israel could have done another 2 months of destruction of Iran's infrastructure and their military, and probably that would have resulted in a regime change. I think it was a mistake. As this ceasefire, I think, is a mistake. Trump took the opportunity to call a ceasefire when we are winning. We were winning.
Yeah, I don't think that Trump forced Israel to do something that it did not want to do. And I think that you have to view the ceasefire in the context of the way the war was conducted up until the ceasefire. And I agree with you that if the government had taken different policies much earlier in the war, it might have ended differently. But the fact that they allowed themselves to slow down and to negotiate for the releases of hostages in the midst of the war, that they were going very methodically, building by building. Part of that was because of weapons supply. That was partly by the Biden administration. Didn't provide Israel weapons. Israel had to husband its weapons. Instead of using air power to destroy buildings, they were literally sending combat engineers to blow them up using
risking lives.
Yes, and many lives were lost as a result. Even maybe hundreds of lives of Jewish soldiers were lost as a result of having to take dynamite to blow up buildings one by one, going into tunnels one by one, instead of flooding them and other things that could have potentially, or gassing them, other things that could have been done. But
flooding them, which was an idea.
Yeah, I think that they actually did try to flood them, and they found that it's ultimately not a very successful method. Because eventually, like, the water dissipates, and then the tunnels remain. So if you it can flood the tunnels. You could even drown terrorists that are in the tunnels if you flood them. But ultimately, with time, that those tunnels would empty and dry up.
Yes, but at least you'd kill the people.
But then the tunnel infrastructure would still be there. Like a year later, you'd still have all these tunnels. So they actually wanted to destroy the tunnels.
I see.
With concrete, with explosives, other things. But I think that I think that if you would have told people on day one of this war that at the end of the war, what you would see is that A, all the hostages would be back. 2, all the senior leadership of Hamas would be destroyed. C, that 70% of all of the buildings in Gaza would be completely destroyed. D, that Israel would control 53% of the Gaza Strip at the end of the war. Plus, Hezbollah would be degraded. Syria is no longer a force or a land bridge between Iran and Lebanon, and that Iran, their nuclear program, will have been massively hit.
Sounds like a win when you describe it that way.
I think so.
It does.
Yeah, and I think anybody would have signed up for that.
The way you've just described it, it sounds like, look, it's not a bad deal. But nevertheless, Hamas remains. And what is likely to happen? Are they going to give up their weapons? Are they going to give up political control of Gaza? And are they going to stay there? Because if they're going to stay there, it's like roaches in the cabinets.
Yeah, I mean, they're a terrorist organization. It says in their charter that they seek to annihilate the state of Israel.
That's the goal.
Right. So we should not assume for 1 second that they're an honest broker here in any negotiation. Even if they go into a period of quiet, they will hide their weapons, and the whole purpose will be to rebuild at some point in the future. So they're not going to just give up their weapons and concede defeat. These are suicide bombers, essentially. They will go to the last man. But what I think the deal does, number one, is, as I mentioned previously, Israel is controlling now more than half of the Gaza Strip. So in that half, Hamas doesn't exist. And what Israel is also trying to do is to empower some of the clans that exist in the Gaza Strip, and to what this essentially is going to do is isolate Hamas into specific areas. So you might have a situation in which Hamas controls, let's say, 25% of the Gaza Strip. And once you have them isolated, and then they also don't have hostages anymore, right? Which was their number one ace card. So you've taken away their ace card and you've isolated them geographically. And if they continue to behave like the bad actors that they are, you can go back in with force into a limited area. And now, because you have the deal, you have the backing of the Trump administration to do that. And in addition to the Trump administration, you also have the backing of countries like Qatar and Turkey and Egypt and Jordan, countries that were putting the pressure on Israel in the beginning. They've now given up on Hamas. So Hamas is completely isolated now, even from the Arab world. They're isolated geographically. And so we just have to wait and watch right now what's going to develop over the next several weeks. But I do think that you might see limited operations. And I think Israel can actually be much more pinpointed in their operations as they try to eliminate little terror cells in certain parts of the Gaza Strip. And you see them doing that, by the way, in Lebanon. I mean, there was a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. I know that I was personally very upset when Israel signed the ceasefire, because we had pushed Hezbollah back something like 70% of what the goal was, and then all of a sudden we stopped. We said, how can we have a ceasefire? Because they'll never let us go back in and attack. But actually, Israel's changed their military doctrine. And you see that even though that there's a ceasefire agreement, Israel continues to strike at every terror movement that's taking place in southern Lebanon. And from what I understand, speaking with Israeli officials, they're viewing this ceasefire deal in Gaza the same as they view it in Lebanon.
Yeah, if they stick up their head, we're still going to shoot them. Okay. Now, talking about Lebanon, many people believe that Hezbollah has been defeated, mainly because of the brilliant exploding pagers, which literally crippled Hezbollah's command structure. In your view, and from what you know, has it been defeated, or is it still a serious threat to Israel?
Well, you still have tens of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, and Israel's degraded probably 85% of Hezbollah's long-range rockets and missiles. And those missiles were basically considered an existential threat to the security of the state of Israel. And so you haven't gotten every last rocket out, but Hezbollah is deterred right now. Where did we see that? The whole purpose of Hezbollah's weapons arsenal was to protect Iran. Iran was developing nuclear weapons. Israel always talked about wanting to take out Iran's nuclear weapons with force if a deal would not take them out diplomatically, which we knew would never happen. And so Iran invested significantly to place all these missiles right on Israel's northern border, because if Israel would strike against Iran, then they would be pummeled from the Hezbollah rockets. And when Israel attacked Iran's nuclear facilities over a course of 12 days, how many rockets did Hezbollah fire during those 12 days at Israel?
Very few, I think, right?
Not one.
Not
one. They were completely deterred. And so Hezbollah now is completely deterred. The Lebanese army, which is not Hezbollah, is working alongside Israel to try to further degrade Hezbollah. But like we said a moment ago, every time Israel sees terrorists moving to the south towards Israel's border, they see all of a sudden another weapons launcher or storage of missiles, they take it out instantly.
And this is a change in Israeli policy.
Complete change of Israeli military doctrine.
So the Lebanese government and military isn't capable by itself of eliminating Hezbollah. Israel has to do it for them.
That's correct. And I think that it's a tremendous service to the Lebanese people that Israel is doing
This used to be a Christian country, right? It was called the Jewel of the Mediterranean, right? And Hezbollah moved in, took control. I don't know how many seats they have in the government, but they're basically in charge because they're terrorists.
Yeah, you're right. They're involved in the parliament. They're a major percentage of the parliament, and ultimately, you cannot have a terrorist organization be part of your government. I mean, that's a big problem, and I think that that's also the lesson in Gaza, that Israel says, okay, you cannot necessarily stamp out an ideology, right? That the ideology will continue to exist, but what you can make sure is that an ideology does not have the weapons in order to carry out their ideology, and that they don't control territory.
Let's move on to another trouble spot, Syria, which borders both Lebanon and Israel. Here's some background for this portion of our discussion. After the fall of President Assad of Syria in late 2024, Ahmed al-Shara, formerly known as al-Julani, took control of Damascus. He suspended the Syrian constitution and appointed himself as president of Syria. As background, Julani was the leader of a terrorist organization called HTS, which was an offshoot of al-Qaeda. Prior to becoming president of Syria, he was a terrorist leader and was such a high-value target of the U.S. that the State Department placed a reward of $10 million for information leading to his location so that he could be either captured or killed. But soon after seizing control, President Trump removed him from the terrorist list and actually met with him in Saudi Arabia one-on-one. I can't understand why he did that. Perhaps, Alex, you can give us some insight into why the President of the United States agreed to have a one-on-one meeting with a known terrorist leader.
Well, I think that there's a few factors here. Number one is that the president, for some reason, seems to have a close relationship with President Erdogan of Turkey, who Israel certainly considers to be an enemy force and not an ally. But Trump, for some reason, discusses Erdogan as a friend, as an ally. But I think that what Trump is looking at is... and with regard to Israel, he says, Israel, you can't be against the entire Middle East, right? You've got a problem with Hamas. You have a problem with Hezbollah. These are terrorist organizations. Yes, you have a right to destroy those, and they're being led by Iran, which is the greatest state sponsor of terror in the world. And so you've got a problem with their nuclear facilities. Okay, let's take care of that. We're going to take care of Hamas. We're going to take care of Hezbollah. We're going to take care of Iran. But you can't be enemies with everybody. And whoever's going to be in control in Syria, is likely to be a bad actor. That's, there's a high percentage chance that that's going to be the case. But Trump tries to use economic leverage, and he says, look, this is a failed country. Al-Shara, al-Julani, he needs to demonstrate that he can rebuild the country if he wants to have support. So what does he need for that? He needs money. And so Trump says, look, let's use economic leverage here, and let's see if we can bring Syria into the Western orbit. And I think that the model for this is the Saudis, right? The Saudis, how many of the 9/11 hijackers, came through Saudi Arabia before they came to the United States, right? Or 17 out of 19, something like that. But the Saudis have made a shift. And now I'm not saying all of a sudden that the Saudis are some kind of a beacon of human rights, but they're much more Western-minded and forward-thinking minded than they were
under
MBS and Mohammed bin Salman. And he's really tried to modernize the country and to bring it into the Western orbit. And if you don't go into the Western orbit, then where do you go? Like, these countries wind up going to China. Now, for Trump, he sees that the main enemy of the United States is China, right? So what he's trying to do is actually to pull these countries back into the American orbit, because he thinks if they're in the American orbit, we can work with them. If we push them away, they're going to go to China, and that's going to go against what Trump believes is the American interest. So he's trying to use economic leverage to pull people back towards America and to try to demonstrate that life's better for them doing business with the United States than it is doing business with China.
Yeah, I understand that, and that makes sense. But still, it irks me that he would personally meet with Giuliani. It could have been done through the State Department or Marco Rubio. Why give him that privilege of meeting with the President of the United States? I find it confusing. Now, regarding Syria, look, you look at a map, and there is a region labeled Syria. But within those lines on the map, from what I understand, there are numerous armed tribes and factions, each of which controls its own territory. So, Alex, is Syria really a country, or is it a region with many different factions that it cannot be possibly unified?
Well, I think that's actually a pattern across the entire Middle East. It's not just Syria; it's also Iraq. It's also the Palestinian-controlled territories.
Yeah.
They're not even
Barbarians.
united, right? I would just say they're tribal, right? That this is a region of tribes, and sometimes tribes
Families.
share families and clans. Some of them share religion, some of them don't share religion. It's a region that's been home to all kinds of minorities and also Muslim majorities. And so Syria is certainly a failed state, Iraq a failed state, Gaza a failed state, Palestinian Authority failed state. I mean, and you see in Syria, for example, as you mentioned, you have Alawite minorities, you have Christian minorities, you have Bedouin, you have Druze minorities, you have Kurdish minorities, all of them, just living in their various areas, and none of them really wanting to live under the dominion of al-Shara,
right.
Or
Assad. They don't want to live under anybody.
Right. And so the question is going to be, can there be new thinking? A lot of these countries, the lines were drawn, after World War II. Like, okay, here's where a country is going to be, and this is who's going to run it. Instead of understanding the modality, I think, of the Middle East and actually giving powers, the right thing to do would be to create an independent Kurdish state, and that would be part of Syria, maybe part of Iraq, and let people govern themselves,
Right.
and not try to unify peoples that don't want to be unified.
They hate each other.
Even in the Palestinian Authority, this was a creation in the 90s of the Oslo Accords, but if you go inside Judea and Samaria, what the Western world refers to as the West Bank, and you think all Palestinians are all one people, well, guess what? A Palestinian man from Hebron is not going to marry a Palestinian woman from Nablus, okay, because the clans don't permit it, right? So if you're not even willing to marry one another, then
How you can be governed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, given the problems, what is the current relationship between Syria and Israel?
Well, I think it's a relationship where Syria fears Israel. They're not going to move any military into the south of Syria towards Israel. Israel's already taken a major chunk of land in Syria. From what I understand, the president of the United States was willing to let Israel take an even larger chunk of Syria after the fall of Bashar Assad. But then questions of, well, how do you hold it, and how many forces do you need to do that? So Israel took the strategic high point of the Golan,
Wonderful.
the northern Golan,
I've
which
been
is. You've been on the Syrian side and the northern Golan?
Syrian side.
Amazing.
Yeah. I have a special visa.
Amazing. And at this point, there's even discussions of some kind of either defense relationship signed between a defense understanding signed between Syria and Israel.
Oh, really?
There's some kind of potential path toward a normalization. But the president of the United States
With Giuliani.
Yes, because
Wow.
because he views the dollars that he can get from the United States as being his most important asset, and if that requires that he signs an agreement with Israel and stabilizes that border, then that will be in his best interest to do it.
So currently, it appears that Israel's military is effectively controlling the border between Syria and Israel to prevent Iranian proxies or anyone else.
Well, I would say even further than that, the IDF operates beyond the border.
Great. One aspect that rarely makes it into mainstream media coverage is Israel's unique relationship with the Druze community, both in Israel and with the Druze living across the border in Syria. Can you explain to the audience who the Druze are and why Israel's relationship with them matters so much?
Yeah, well, the Druze are a minority. As you mentioned, they live both in northern Israel, near to Syria, and also many live in Syria. I believe there's about 150,000 Druze living in Israel. They're not Muslims. They're Arabs, but they're not Muslims. They believe that they're descendants of Jethro, Yitro, who was Moses' father-in-law.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they, as a doctrine, they are very loyal to the host countries in which they live, to the sovereign over the territory. And so the Druze in Israel, this is a minority of Arabs that are very, very loyal to the state of Israel. And you have many Druze that serve in the IDF, in the Israeli
In
military.
high-level positions, matter of fact.
Absolutely, and in the Israeli police. By the way, Druze officers in the police are the ones that police the Temple Mount. because they are Arab, they speak Arabic, and when Giuliani's troops in Syria started attacking minorities, including Christians, including Alawites, and including Kurds, and including the Druze, Israel came to the defense of the Druze living in Syria. Mm-hmm. And they did that specifically because they said, we are protecting this minority. And people think that Israel is an oppressive force. Israel protects every minority, whether it's Christians or Druze, and they even protect Muslim holy places in Israel. They protect everything. And to the extent that when those Druze brethren said, our brothers in Syria need help, who was there? The IDF went to protect the Druze.
Doesn't make national news. Not at all.
No, and nobody cares that the Druze are being slaughtered by this offshoot of Al Qaeda in Syria, right? If there's no Jews, there's no news, right? Yeah. And so if the Jews are not the oppressor, it's not news. If the Jews are the heroes of the situation, that's not going to get into the papers.
Alex, let's turn to politics in America and the administration's current position on Israel. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance have both recently adjusted their rhetoric about Gaza and Israel's military actions there. And they have forced Israel, as I mentioned, to accept their plan for Gaza. What's your sense? What's behind this subtle shift?
Well, first of all, I think, again, this 20-point ceasefire plan, the overwhelming majority of those 20 points were presented by Israel. This was the deal that Israel wanted. I'm not saying that the United States did not edit some of the points or that there was some feedback from other countries, but this was the deal.
I thought it was something that was forced upon Israel.
I don't think this was forced upon Israel at all. I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to get to a deal for many reasons, and that he's been working very closely with the president, as we've seen throughout the entire war, to get the weapons that Israel needs to terminate Iran's nuclear program and to get to a ceasefire. They've been working very closely together. Now, you're right about some of the rhetoric shift, and I think that what Trump was trying to do was to bring the Arab countries on board with the isolation of Hamas. And so to do that, he's been projecting, and I think he's been doing so with the implicit permission of Israel, to make it look like he's forcing Israel to do things Israel doesn't want to do.
I see. Brilliant. And if that's the case, that's brilliant.
Because Netanyahu, his doctrine throughout the war, he always said that the only way that you're going to get Hamas to negotiate is under force. So you have to have this. This concept that basically, like, America's holding Israel back, and so that's why, in order to establish credibility with these Arab countries, Trump's saying, I'm pressuring Israel to do this, I'm pressuring Israel to do that.
I see. It's really a deeper level.
We've seen Trump do a lot of misdirection during this war that's ultimately been to Israel's benefit. Now, J.D. Vance, I think, might be another story. I don't think that he has Israel in his heart the way that President Trump does. I think President Trump actually believes that his blessing as President of the United States is to help and defend the state of Israel. That's one. And I don't think that J.D. Vance feels like that. So, you have to watch and learn. I think that, Israel's been trying to have a relationship with J.D. Vance. I think, I know that the Prime Minister and Minister Ron Dermer have met privately with Vance on many occasions. So I don't think that Vance is necessarily, completely in this camp of Tucker Carlson, even though we know that Vance and Carlson are close. We've seen that. We saw J.D. Vance host that first episode of the Charlie Kirk Show and brought Tucker Carlson right on.
Right.
And we know that Tucker Carlson's son is on the communications team of J.D. Vance. Yeah. So we have to watch and wait over there. But I think that Vance is not the one who's really calling the shots in this relationship.
No, I think that's right.
The president of the United States.
I'm just concerned that he's going to be the next nominee, and I hope he's not. Now, talking about Qatar and its influence, in 2025, Trump appointed Steve Witkoff, a real estate developer and one of Trump's closest friends. He appointed him to be America's special envoy for the Middle East to help find a solution to the war in Gaza. But how can Witkoff be an honest broker when it's known that Qatar's sovereign wealth fund paid over $600 million in 2023 to save Witkoff's firm from a meltdown. And we know that Qatar has long been a refuge for senior Hamas leaders. In addition, it's been reported that Trump and his family have significant business dealings in Qatar. So I don't understand. Trump often calls Qatar an ally of the United States, whereas we know that Qatar has been funding pro-Arab, anti-American programs at our universities for decades. So it seems to me that Trump is putting those business interests ahead of America's relationship with Israel. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that the Trump administration is a bit compromised on Qatar. I mean, there's nobody in Israel that will tell you that Qatar is an ally.
Right.
Not one. I mean, everybody understands that they are the main influence behind Hamas, that when you were negotiating with the Qataris, they're not the mediators, they're Hamas. And that Trump sees it differently is definitely a difference of opinion between the United States.
But it's not just opinion.
Right.
And he accepted a plane, a 747. Now, as an American, I'm embarrassed that we have to take hand-me-downs from other countries. And the 747 is clearly a hand-me-down, okay? Anybody who knows about aviation, and I'm not an expert, but I've read enough about it, nobody wants a 747. You can't get parts for it, and it's terribly inefficient on fuel. And they offered it to him, and it would have been proper, in my view, to say, well, thank you very much for the offer, but we don't need your help.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know so much about planes, but I don't see why the United States, which has companies like Boeing, has to
building the 747s,
has to turn to Qatar to get a plane.
Right.
But I think that, again, it's part of the president's economic strategy. And he looks at Qatar. Qatar is a nation of immense wealth. And they're a country that his son-in-law does a lot of business with. His envoy, Steve Witkoff, is doing a lot of business with. And they're saying, hey, wait a second. We know that they have malign influence, but we do business with these guys. And so there's a choice. We could either cut them off from business, or we can continue to do business with them and try to bring them along and keep them in our orbit. Can we show them the path of the Saudis?
Funders of the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
I agree with you, but I think that the Trump viewpoint on this is if we push them away, they go with all of their wealth over to China, and then we can't deal with them. And I think that, so Trump looks at it. He understands that things are not binary. It's not black and white. He realizes that there's a bit of a malign influence there, but he thinks that he can use economic leverage to keep them in the American orbit and keep them out of the Chinese orbit, and hope that ultimately the Qataris go the path of the Saudis, who are also funding the university campuses, Middle East studies programs.
Less so, I think.
Less so now.
Yeah.
Less so now, right?
Years,
So
decades.
I think that this is the model that Trump is hoping that Qatar will follow.
But I don't see how you use economic interest or pressure against a country that's enormously wealthy. It just doesn't fit to me.
Well, the Qataris like doing business in the West, right? You see that. I mean, they buying soccer teams and stadiums, and they very much value their influence and ability to do business with the West.
Well, I think they value influencing things in the
Exactly.
West. All right, and for us to have our major military base in Qatar rather than in a pro-Western country like Israel makes no sense.
Not only that, I mean, the United States is opening up a joint base with the Qataris in Idaho.
Idaho, to train their pilots.
And worse than that, we know that one of the moves that Israel made, the offensive move that actually led towards the signing of the ceasefire, was attempting to assassinate Hamas leadership inside Qatar. Right. And what did the United States, what did President Trump do in the wake of that? He signed an executive order which stated that any attack on Qatar would be seen as a threat to the security and interests of the United States.
Terrible.
And nobody understands why the United States would put such a status
Yeah.
on Qatar. I mean, certainly Israel doesn't have that kind of a
Right.
status.
Right.
No other country has that kind of a status. So why does Qatar get that status? So certainly something to watch. I'm just trying to explain what I think the Trump administration is trying to do. I think as far as Israel is concerned, they find it extremely troublesome.
Worrisome.
But I
Very
don't.
worrisome.
Think that it comes at the expense of Trump's relationship with Israel and what he tries to do to help the state of Israel. I think that he
All right.
views
I'm
both
comforted by
as
that.
both as allies.
Let's shift gears and talk about Israel's internal politics. From here in the United States, it often looks like Israelis are deeply divided, not just on security issues, but on leadership and direction. There seems to be a segment of Israeli population who hates Prime Minister Netanyahu, irrespective of his accomplishments, just like those in the U.S. who suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, where Trump can't do anything right. Why do you think the left in Israel is so reflexively opposed to Netanyahu? Is it ideologically, or is it something else?
Well, I think that there is something ideological here. You have you have this in the United States, you have it in Europe, you have it in Israel. There is a civilizational battle for the souls of countries and territories taking place. And I think in Israel, what you have is you see that the population of religious is growing, traditional is growing, that the so-called settlers, Jews that live over the Green Line in the communities of Judea and Samaria, these populations are growing because these are the people that are having children. More young people in Israel are moving to the right and becoming more nationalist, more traditional, and the secular left that is really responsible to a large extent for building the institutions of the country are seeing their influence and their size getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you have this battle here, which is over the fabric of the future of the country. On the one hand, is Israel going to be a strong nationalist country, which may be isolated, internationally, but stands up for its own interest, that protects its land, that wants to be sovereign over territory, especially in Judea and Samaria, and potentially even in Gaza? Or is Israel some kind of a secular extension of Western Europe on the Eastern Mediterranean, which is what the secular left wants? And what they see with Netanyahu is, Netanyahu is probably the most left-wing member of his own government right now. Netanyahu
Never thought of it that way.
Netanyahu over the years has always preferred to govern from the center, with parties both to his right and to his left in coalitions. But what's happened is over time is that the left has proved, and we see this in America also, the left spits its own leaders out over and over again. And they tried to spit out Netanyahu because Netanyahu is not, well, he's not like a far right winger, but he's also not a far left winger. He's like really in the middle. And what's happened over time is that he's found greater security on the right side of the Israeli political spectrum. And when that happens, the way the parliamentary system works and budgets work is that all of the fringes of the budget wind up going to religious and right-wing causes at the expense of the left-wing causes. And so the left wing has just been really fed up with Netanyahu. And quite frankly, we just have to say this about the prime minister, is that he is a supremely talented individual. I think he's the leader of a generation, and he's also a political animal. And they just can't. They don't know how to defeat him, and they cannot bring another comes close to standing next to him. So there's a real
He's
hatred.
the Churchill of our times, I believe.
I think that's right. But even though the left, and they have this BB derangement syndrome, but they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they know that, and that's why they're willing to be more destructive and more vocal, because they recognize that they're losing. It's like when a star dies, a star it explodes, and that's what you're seeing is happening to the left. I mean, the country was already shifting to the right. After the left tried to block Netanyahu 5 consecutive times for forming a government. He formed an overwhelming right-wing majority government.
Right.
And what do you think's happened since October 7th?
Yeah,
the country's only moved even
right.
further to the right. So, we're going to have to sort of survive and be patient and wait out this transition. But the state of Israel is moving further and further to the right. And I think the major difference between Israel and the United States, and one of the reasons why I'm actually very confident in the future of Israel versus the future trajectory of the United States, is because, in the United States, the ones who are conservative are older, and then the younger and younger you get, the more progressive.
Right.
And
the
in Israel,
demographics are in the wrong direction.
and in Israel, the ones who are out there protesting Netanyahu and shouting from the rooftops, they're 70-year-old protesters.
Right.
And the younger and younger you go, the more conservative you get.
Very interesting. Very optimistic and positive view. Thank you. One final question. What should Americans who support Israel, what should they do? Is it advocacy, education, getting involved in politics? What do you think we should do, people like myself?
Well, I think you should do all of that. Certainly make sure that you're getting good information. I'll tell you, throughout this war, people that I think were even politically conservative, they're asking me, what's going on? Because we keep reading these stories in the media, these reports that Trump is turning on Israel, and they all prove to not be true. And we're, each one of us is getting punched in the face every time there's an article that's filled with misinformation. So first of all, is make sure you're getting good information. Once you know you're getting good information, share good information. We were at a conference just this weekend, and we had Minister Dermer present to the audience, and he's essentially like the vice prime minister of Israel right now. He's the deputy to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he said, the case for Israel is actually a very easy case to make. He said the problem is nobody's making the case. So we have to do a lot better in terms of making the case of why it's in America's interest to support Israel, right? Not why it's in Israel's interest. It's in America's national security interest and economic interest to support the state of Israel. And then when it comes to anti-Semitism, I think that we have to be very, very strict right now in terms of looking at where our philanthropic dollars are going and where they're not going. Like, why are Jewish donors and conservative donors giving money to university campuses that are teaching their students to hate America and hate Israel? Right. And then at the same time, you have to be involved in policy and legal issues. You have to make sure that the federal government, state governments, local governments are basically legislating against hate, against anti-Semitism. There's a lot to do. And I think what we need to do is to mobilize. We need to communicate amongst ourselves better. And we need to take action.
Right. Thought and reading about it isn't enough. You have to do something. So, Alex, in a world where truth, our world, is too often sacrificed for clicks or ideology, JNS, the news organization that you lead, continues to be a model for what responsible journalism should be. I want to thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you so much more for your continued, detailed, and accurate reporting on events in Israel and the Middle East.
Dr. Bob, thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about current events in the Middle East, I encourage you to visit jns.org for daily updates directly from Jerusalem. There you're going to find accurate and unbiased reporting that you just won't get from mainstream media. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe, and we'll automatically notify you of future episodes in this series.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.